The Federal Reserve remains incredibly dovish here and supportive of the markets. What's your take of the underlying economy here? How cautious should we be, and is the Fed cautious enough?
Well, I think there's certainly evidence of weakness bubbling underneath the surface in the U.S. economy at this point. So I do think that from an investor standpoint, from a market participant standpoint, we do need to take a step back and recognize that the economy may be coming to the end of the recovery. And now we need to start talking about or preparing for a recession around the corner. Now, in terms of the Fed's tone, it's interesting because they've done a very clear about face. At the end of last year, they were continuing along this very aggressive pathway, raising rates at a consistent quarter point every quarter. And then at the start of 19, all of a sudden instilling this idea of patience. So the idea is, what did the Fed see to really cause this change in tune? And I think it was the fact that the Fed was finally waking up to some of this consistent weakness now becoming evident in the underlying data. So the Fed beginning to be a bit more cautious, but going forward, as we continue to see waning momentum, I do think the Fed is going to remain sidelined and become even more patient, potentially talking about the next rate change being a rate cut.
When, Lindsay? Because right now the market isn't starting to price a cut until 2020. Is the market not bearish enough in your mind? Do we see the Fed cut this year?
Well, we potentially could. I do think that the Fed is going to remain on the sideline for quite some time. And the weakness, we don't expect to really begin to talk about negative growth until 2020. And that's when the pressure is going to be on the Fed to cut rates. But if we start to see some of these geopolitical risks undermine the domestic economy at a much faster pace than we're expecting, well, we could see the Fed front load that action into 2019. But again, that's not our baseline forecast. We are expecting that weakness to show more clearly in 2020, and at that point, force the Fed's hand to begin to cut rates.